Hey everyone, and a very warm welcome back. Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful and, let's be honest, one of the most challenging narratives in the Quran, the story of the Prophet Lūṭ. It's this short, super dramatic account of a moral showdown. But wow, its themes have echoed through the centuries, asking some really tough questions. So let's unpack it together. Here's how we're going to walk through it. We'll start with Lot's shocking initial warning. Then we'll get into the specific transgression he was calling out. After that, we'll look at the community's wild response, witness the final, dramatic reckoning, and then zoom out to see how this story is actually part of a much bigger pattern in the Quran. All right, so the story kicks off not with a gentle suggestion, but with this incredibly direct and startling confrontation. The Prophet Lūṭ doesn't ease into his message at all. He comes right out of the gate with a sharp public rebuke. Now, just think about that for a second. What's so striking here is the sheer scale of the accusation. Lūṭ is basically saying, what you're doing is so shameless, so out there, that it's literally unprecedented in all of human history. This tells us right away we're not talking about some quiet private sin. This is a public phenomenon. And to really get the weight of this, we have to look at this key Arabic term, al-fahisha. This word doesn't just mean any old sin. It specifically points to something that is grossly, severely, and publicly indecent. So the Quran is framing this whole situation not as a private, personal feeling, but as a kind of social sickness, a pathology that was poisoning the entire community. Okay, so from that broad, shocking opener, the warning then zooms in and gets even more specific. The very next verse tells us exactly what the act is, but, and this is so important, it also broadens the critique from just that act to a problem with the entire community's character. So here we have it, the specific act. Men approaching other men with desire, turning away from women. But you gotta pay close attention to that last part. Rather, you are a transgressing people. This is the pivot. The critique is shifting from what they do to what they are. And this really breaks down the two layers of the problem beautifully. You've got the specific act on one level, sure, but on a much deeper level. The Quran identifies them as qawmun musrifun, which means a people defined by their excess, by just smashing through all moral and social boundaries. And this concept of israf is absolutely crucial. It's not just one thing. It's about a complete societal decay. We're talking injustice, aggression, violating sacred customs like hospitality, which was a huge deal. In fact, classical commentators mention that these people were known for attacking their guests. It's a total collapse of social order. So the main point here is that the specific sexual act is being presented as a symptom of a much, much deeper societal disease. So how does a society like this, a society deep in israf, respond when they're given a moral warning? Do they take a moment to reflect, maybe feel a little bit of remorse? Nope, they do something way more sinister. They reject the message by completely inverting reality. I mean, their response is just breathtaking in its irony. They basically say, get Lūṭ and his followers out of here. And why? What's their reason? Because they're people who insist on being pure. Their purity is literally presented as a crime. This is a classic psychological defense mechanism, right? It's projection. When they're confronted with their own impurity, they just flip it and slap that label onto the very people who are calling for reform. It's a tactic to shut down the community's conscience, and it's a sure sign of complete moral blindness. They just can't see that the problem is with them, so they decide the messenger has to be the problem. And that rejection, well, that's the point of no return. The community has made its choice loud and clear, and that choice triggers a swift and incredibly decisive divine intervention. The whole story now pivots to its dramatic finale, which unfolds in three really distinct stages. There's a rescue, there's an exception to that rescue, and then there's a catastrophic judgment for the city. So let's just trace the sequence. First, the rescue. Lūṭ and the few believers with him are led to safety. But then you get the exception, his own wife. The text says she remained behind. And what commentators have always understood that to mean is that her loyalties, her heart, were ultimately with her people, not with the divine message. And finally, the judgment, or rain of stones. It's a punishment that doesn't just destroy, it's meant to serve as this unforgettable, permanent sign of moral cause and effect. Now, it's really tempting to look at this story as just a one-off event, something isolated and unique. But the Quran immediately shows us that that's not the right way to see it at all.
This single story is actually one piece of a much, much larger moral pattern.
Get this. The verse that comes immediately after this story introduces the next prophet, Shu'aib. And what was his community's main problem? Economic corruption. They were cheating people in business, messing with the weights and measures. The Quran puts these stories back to back for a reason, to show us a clear pattern. Societies can crumble from all different kinds of moral corruption, whether it's sexual or commercial, but the underlying dynamic, it's exactly the same.
And once you see it, you start seeing this exact pattern repeat all over the Quran. It always starts with a prophet delivering a clear moral warning. Then the people, who are usually pretty comfortable in their ways, they deny and reject the message. Often they even turn on the messenger. But in the end, the outcome is always the same. The believers are saved, and those who insist on their path face some form of divine justice. The story of Lot isn't just a story, it's the blueprint for this timeless cycle. So what are we supposed to take away from all of this? According to classical Islamic scholarship, it really boils down to three big lessons. First, it's a powerful condemnation of public wrongdoing that tears apart the social fabric. Second, it's a sharp critique of a community's refusal to look in the mirror, choosing instead to project its own faults onto others. And third, the story itself is meant to be a permanent public warning about the undeniable link between a community's moral choices and its ultimate destiny. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to mull over. This ancient pattern, this cycle of warning, rejection, and consequence, it was preserved for a reason. So the question for us is, what can it teach us about the challenges of moral courage, social responsibility, and the health of our own communities today? Thanks so much for joining me.